London at night had a certain kind of silence that only powerful men understood. It wasn't the absence of sound. The city still hummed with taxis, distant sirens, and the endless pulse of neon nightlife. But beneath that noise, there existed another rhythm entirely, the quiet machinery of power, deals made in shadows, fortunes changing hands behind locked doors. And at the center of that hidden rhythm sat Alessandro Sterling. Most people in London had never heard his name, those who had rarely said it out loud. But inside the underworld, Alex Sterling was spoken of the way sailors spoke about storms, with a mixture of respect and quiet fear, from the glass walls of his penthouse office overlooking the Thames. The city spread beneath him like territory already conquered. 45 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, Alex carried himself with the calm confidence of a man who had climbed from nothing and never intended to fall again. His dark hair was brushed neatly back, his tailored black suit cut with Savile Row precision. The gold watch on his wrist alone could pay a year's salary for most men in the city. 3 decades earlier, he had been a scholarship kid from a forgotten industrial town. Now he controlled half the illegal nightlife in London. Nightclubs from Soho to Mayfair paid him protection money. Shipping containers passed through the docks under his protection, carrying goods that never appeared on official manifests. And behind it all ran the quiet, financial arteries of offshore accounts and shell companies that washed millions clean every week. Alex liked to think of himself as the architect of it all, the king of a kingdom no one could see. He stood near the panoramic window with a glass of whiskey in one hand, watching the lights of the city flicker across the river. A man didn't survive in his world without learning to appreciate moments like this, quiet victories, silent confirmations that the gamble had been worth it. Behind him, the elevator doors opened with a soft chime. His head of security stepped inside the office without speaking. The man was former military, built like a concrete pillar and trained to move quietly even in expensive shoes. In his hand was a single envelope. "Courier just delivered this downstairs," he said. Alex didn't turn immediately. Messages rarely reached him without layers of filtering. Anything that made it this far was either very important or very dangerous. Finally, he faced the man and accepted the envelope. It was heavier than expected. The paper was thick, textured, expensive, the kind of stationery that belonged to old aristocratic houses or royal invitations. But what caught his attention was the seal, black wax pressed carefully into the fold. And stamped into the wax was the symbol of a rose, long thorns curling round the petals like claws. Alex studied it for a moment before breaking the seal. Inside was a single card, cream-colored, gold-edged. The handwriting was elegant and deliberate. "You are cordially invited to attend the Obsidian Royal Gala." A small line beneath it read, "Kensington Palace, private entrance, midnight." Alex leaned back against his desk slowly, letting out a low breath. The Obsidian Gala, even in the criminal world, the name carried weight. It wasn't a party. It wasn't a celebration. It was a gathering. Once every few years, the most powerful crime families in Europe met quietly behind palace walls to negotiate territory, alliances, and silent wars before they ever reached the streets. Cartel financiers, Russian oligarchs, Italian syndicates, men who ruled continents without ever appearing on a ballot. And tonight, someone had invited him. A slow smile spread across Alex's face. Recognition, that was what this was. For years he had built his empire piece by piece, expanding territory, crushing rivals, buying silence from the right people. Now the old powers had finally noticed, finally understood who ruled London. He placed the card down on his desk and reached for his whiskey again. Across the room, laughter drifted in from the lounge area. Tiffany. She was sprawled across the leather sofa, scrolling through her phone. Legs crossed elegantly, her platinum hair spilling over one shoulder like liquid silver.
If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to support us on Patreon. Get more exclusive romance and drama stories, daily videos, and long-length audio storytelling. Link in the description.
At 23, she was everything Alex believed the world should admire, young, beautiful, and completely aware of the effect she had on men. 3 years ago, he had left his wife for her. The tabloids had loved that story. Ali, Tiffany called, without looking up. Why is security bringing you mail like you're a medieval king? Alex walked toward her, tossing the invitation onto the coffee table. Because sometimes, he said casually, important people know how to show respect. Tiffany picked up the card, reading it quickly. Her eyes widened. Oh my God. Ollie, the Obsidian Gala. She whispered. Alex smirked. That's right. She jumped off the couch immediately, excitement exploding across her face. Ali, this is huge. This is like royalty-level rich people, politicians, crime families, billionaires. He poured himself another drink. We are the royalty, Tiffany. She was already spinning around the room, imagining dresses and cameras and jealous stares. Alex watched her with quiet amusement. This was exactly how he wanted to arrive. Powerful, untouchable, with the most beautiful woman in the room on his arm. A spectacle. He picked up the invitation again, turning it between his fingers. His eyes settled once more on the silver rose pressed into the wax. Something about it tugged faintly at the back of his memory. A garden, rain on dark petals, and a quiet woman kneeling beside a row of rose bushes. Genevieve. Alex chuckled softly to himself and pushed the thought away like an annoying fly. Genevieve belonged to another life, another version of him, a weaker one. Wherever she was now, it certainly wasn't anywhere near the kind of rooms he walked into. He slipped the invitation into his jacket pocket and looked out at the glowing skyline of London once more. The Obsidian Gala, the night the kings of Europe gathered. And tonight, he intended to show them exactly who ruled this city. What Alex Sterling didn't realize yet was that he had just accepted an invitation, not to a celebration, but to a reckoning. Tiffany Rose believed attention was the purest form of power, and for the last 3 years, Alessandro Sterling had given her more of it than most women could ever imagine. In the mirrored dressing room of Alex's penthouse, she stood beneath the warm glow of vanity lights, turning slowly in front of the floor-length mirror while the city of London glittered beyond the windows like a jeweled crown. A dozen dresses lay scattered across the marble floor silk. Sequins, velvet, crystal each, one more extravagant than the last. Tiffany studied her reflection carefully, adjusting a strap on a diamond-studded gown that clung to her body like liquid silver. She was 23 years old, breathtakingly beautiful, and completely aware that beauty was a weapon sharper than any blade carried by Alex's soldiers. For Tiffany, the Obsidian Royal Gala was not simply a party. It was a stage, and she intended to walk into it like a star stepping into a spotlight. She imagined the room already crime lords, billionaires, politicians pretending not to know one another, and in the center of it all, she would be the woman beside London's most feared man. Alex watched her from the doorway, leaning against the frame with the quiet confidence of someone who owned the world outside those windows. The invitation sat heavy in his pocket, and the thought of that gathering stirred something deep inside him, something dangerously close to excitement. For years he had operated in the shadows of older crime families who believed London was still their chessboard. Tonight he would remind them the board had changed. Tiffany noticed his reflection in the mirror and smiled slowly. The kind of smile that had dismantled more than one man's discipline. "You've been staring at me like that for 10 minutes, she teased, smoothing her hair. "Trying to decide if I'm too beautiful for your little Mafia party." Alex chuckled quietly and stepped into the room, the polished leather of his shoes echoing softly across the marble floor. "Not too beautiful," he said, his voice calm and low, "just loud enough to make an entrance." Tiffany laughed, spinning again so the gown caught the light like shattered glass. "Good, because if we're going to something called the Obsidian Gala, I'm not showing up looking modest." She walked closer to him, resting her hands lightly against his chest. "Everyone will be watching us, won't they?" Alex looked down at her and smiled the way predators do when they know the hunt is already over. "That's the idea." Tiffany kissed his cheek quickly before returning to the mirror, already imagining the stunned expressions she would collect from powerful men who secretly wished they were the ones bringing her through those palace doors. Alex poured himself another whiskey from the crystal decanter near the window, the amber liquid catching the city lights like molten gold. His mind wandered briefly to the past, to a memory he rarely allowed himself to revisit: Genevieve, the woman who had once stood in a kitchen wearing an oversized sweater, stirring soup while quietly asking him how his meetings had gone. The woman who believed loyalty mattered more than power. Alex had once admired that softness. Later, he came to despise it. The moment he realized he could become something bigger than the life they shared, she had become an obstacle rather than a partner. Their final conversation returned to him now like an old ghost. Rain sliding down the windshield of his car. Genevieve standing beside the curb holding divorce papers with trembling hands. Her voice had been calm, painfully calm, when she asked if there was truly no place left for her in the future he was building. Alex had laughed, then a cruel, impatient laugh that still echoed faintly in the corners of his memory. "You don't belong in the world I'm going to run," he had told her. "You're too gentle for it." Tiffany's voice snapped him back to the present. "Ollie, which one do you think will make the biggest impression?" She held up 2 glittering dresses like trophies. Alex looked at them briefly before finishing his drink. "The one that blinds people," he said. Tiffany grinned victoriously and returned to the mirror, already envisioning the entrance she would make. Alex turned toward the window again, the invitation still resting inside his jacket like a quiet promise. The silver rose seal flickered in his thoughts once more, carrying with it that strange, uncomfortable familiarity he couldn't quite place. Somewhere deep in his memory, beneath layers of ambition and arrogance, a faint warning stirred, but Alex Sterling had built his empire by ignoring warnings. And tonight, he believed he was walking into a room that would finally recognize him as its king. He had no idea he was walking into a room built by someone who had once watched him leave in the rain. London wore a different face the night of the Obsidian Royal Gala. The city was wrapped in a fog that rolled across the Thames like a living thing, swallowing the distant lights of bridges and towers until only scattered glimmers remained. But beyond the iron gates of Kensington Palace, the darkness gave way to brilliance. The long private drive leading to the palace was lined with silent security vehicles and armed guards whose presence was discreet but unmistakable. One by one, black Rolls-Royces and armored Maybachs glided through the gates. delivering their passengers like offerings to some unseen throne. These were not ordinary guests. They were the quiet rulers of the world's darker economies, cartel financiers from South America, Russian oligarchs with private armies, European crime families whose fortunes were older than most governments. Every arrival was met with polite nods and guarded smiles, alliances disguised as courtesy. Inside the final limousine approaching the palace, Alessandro Sterling sat in composed silence, adjusting the cuffs of his midnight blue tuxedo while studying the palace lights through the tinted window. The ancient building stood illuminated against the fog like a fortress of marble and glass, its towering windows glowing gold against the night sky. Beside him, Tiffany Rose could barely contain her excitement. Her crystal-studded gown shimmered with every small movement, the fabric catching the light in dazzling flashes that made her look like a living jewel. She pressed her hand against the glass, her breath fogging the window slightly as she peered outside. "Ollie, look," she whispered breathlessly. "That's Viktor Malkov getting out of that car, the Russian shipping king. And over there, that's the DeLuca family from Naples." Alex followed her gaze calmly, recognizing many of the faces stepping onto the red carpet beyond the palace gates. These were men who once controlled territories he had slowly taken from them piece by piece. Some had underestimated him. Others had tried to eliminate him. Tonight they would see the man who had survived every attempt. The limousine came to a smooth stop before the palace entrance. A uniformed attendant opened the door, and cold night air rushed in carrying the scent of wet stone and expensive perfume. Alex stepped out first, straightening his jacket with the effortless authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention. Tiffany followed, placing her hand in his as camera flashes burst from the distant press line held behind velvet ropes. Though the gala itself remained private, the world still watched from the outside. Together they walked toward the towering palace doors, their reflections gliding across the polished marble steps like figures from some dark royal procession. Yet as Alex crossed the threshold into the palace ballroom, something immediately felt wrong. The room was magnificent beyond expectation. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings painted with centuries-old murals, their light reflecting across marble floors and velvet curtains draped along towering windows. Hundreds of black roses hung suspended above the ballroom like a storm of dark petals frozen in mid-air. The decor was stunning, but the atmosphere was different from what Alex expected. The room wasn't loud with laughter or music. Instead, it carried a quiet tension, a restrained energy that moved through the crowd like a current beneath calm water. Conversations were hushed, eyes cautious. Guests stood in small clusters, whispering behind crystal glasses of champagne, their gazes occasionally drifting toward the enormous double doors at the far end of the ballroom. Alex noticed something else as he guided Tiffany through the room. People were watching him, not with the usual admiration or rivalry he was used to receiving, but with something far more unsettling: curiosity, confusion, and beneath it all, a faint trace of pity. Tiffany leaned closer to him, her voice suddenly uncertain. "Ollie, why does everyone look like they know something we don't?" Alex dismissed the thought with a small shake of his head, though the feeling in his chest had already begun to tighten. He reached for a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, taking a slow sip while scanning the crowd. Then he heard the whisper that changed everything. A woman standing nearby murmured quietly to her companion, her voice barely audible above the soft orchestra playing in the background. "They say she returned from Paris this morning," she said. "The heir, the one who inherited the Van Dorn Empire." Her companion frowned. "Impossible." That family vanished decades ago. The woman shook her head slowly. Apparently not. Tonight is her return. Alex felt a strange chill creep along the back of his neck. Across the ballroom, the massive double doors remained closed, guarded by two silent men in black suits who looked less like security and more like soldiers awaiting a command. Whatever or whoever was about to walk through those doors had 300 of the most dangerous people in the world waiting in complete silence. And for the first time since arriving, Alessandro Sterling felt the faintest whisper of unease stirring inside him. The orchestra's music faded slowly, like a tide retreating from the shore, leaving the ballroom suspended in a silence so complete it felt almost deliberate. Hundreds of conversations died mid-sentence as every eye in the palace drifted toward the balcony above the ballroom floor. Alessandro Sterling felt the shift immediately. It was the kind of quiet he had experienced before, only in moments when something powerful was about to reveal itself, like the instant before a judge announced a verdict or the breathless pause before a gun was fired. Even Tiffany sensed it, her fingers tightening slightly around Alex's arm as the crystal chandeliers dimmed, casting the room in a darker, more theatrical glow. The towering double doors on the balcony creaked open slowly, the ancient hinges groaning softly beneath centuries of weight. A single spotlight cut through the dim ballroom and illuminated the figure stepping forward onto the marble railing. The announcer's voice echoed across the vast chamber, smooth and commanding, amplified through hidden speakers that seemed to vibrate within the palace walls themselves. "Ladies and gentlemen," the voice declared with ceremonial precision, "please welcome the host of tonight's Obsidian Royal Gala, the chairwoman of the Van Dorn Consortium and the sovereign head of the Van Dorn dynasty." A pause followed, brief but heavy enough to send whispers rippling through the crowd like wind across tall grass. Her Grace, Genevieve Van Dorn. For a moment, Alessandro Sterling did not breathe. The name struck him like a sudden blow, though his mind refused to process it immediately. The woman stepping onto the balcony stood tall beneath the chandelier light, her presence commanding the room with an effortless authority that silenced even the most arrogant men in attendance. She wore an emerald velvet gown that flowed across her figure like liquid shadow, its high neckline and long sleeves elegant rather than revealing, yet somehow more captivating than the glittering dresses worn by half the women below. Diamonds rested against her throat in a narrow choker that sparkled like captured stars, and her dark chestnut hair was swept upward in a graceful arrangement that revealed the sharp elegance of her profile. But it wasn't the dress or the diamonds that froze Alex in place. It was her face. His champagne glass slipped from his fingers before he realized what had happened. The crystal shattered against the marble floor with a sharp crack that echoed across the quiet ballroom, drawing several curious glances from nearby guests. Tiffany gasped beside him, startled by the sudden movement, but Alex didn't hear her. His eyes were locked on the woman above. The years had transformed her. The soft, hesitant girl he remembered had vanished entirely. In her place stood someone composed and commanding, her gaze sweeping across the crowd with cool confidence, as though she had been born to stand above them all. Yet beneath that regal transformation, the features were unmistakable. The curve of her cheekbones, the calm steadiness of her eyes. Genevieve, his ex-wife, the same woman who once apologized for speaking too loudly at dinner parties, now stood above a room full of criminals, kings, and billionaires as though she owned the air they breathed. Tiffany leaned closer to Alex, whispering sharply, "Ollie, why are you staring like that? Do you know her?" But Alex couldn't answer. His mind was racing through memories he had buried years ago. Genevieve kneeling beside rose bushes in their small garden. Genevieve laughing quietly in the kitchen. Genevieve standing in the rain holding divorce papers with trembling hands. The woman on the balcony bore the same face. Yet the difference between those memories and the figure before him was like the difference between a candle and a wildfire. The crowd erupted into applause, the sound swelling into a powerful wave that filled the ballroom from wall to wall. Men who commanded armies and empires clapped respectfully as Genevieve inclined her head in graceful acknowledgement. When the applause faded, she stepped closer to the railing, her voice carrying effortlessly across the room without strain. "Welcome," she said calmly, the words smooth and deliberate, to the resurrection. Her eyes drifted slowly across the ballroom until they stopped on Alessandro Sterling. She held his gaze for several silent seconds, her expression unreadable, neither warm nor hostile. Then the faintest hint of a smile touched her lips, not kind, not cruel, but something far more dangerous. Recognition. And in that moment, Alex realized something chilling. This entire evening had never been about power or prestige or recognition. The Obsidian Royal Gala had been arranged by Genevieve Van Dorn herself, and he had just walked directly into her kingdom, holding the hand of the woman he had left her for. The applause that followed, Genevieve's appearance did not feel like celebration to Alessandro Sterling. It felt like judgment. The sound rolled across the ballroom like thunder. Hundreds of powerful men and women acknowledging the arrival of the one person who now commanded the room. Alex stood frozen among them, his mind racing to understand the impossible transformation he was witnessing. 3 years ago, Genevieve had been standing in the rain outside a solicitor's office wearing a faded coat, quietly signing the papers that ended their marriage. Now she stood above a palace full of criminal royalty, wearing emerald velvet and diamonds worth more than his first empire. The contrast was so violent, it made the world feel slightly unreal. Beside him, Tiffany leaned closer, her voice trembling with excitement rather than confusion. "Ali, this is insane," she whispered, clutching his arm. "Your ex-wife is literally hosting the most powerful criminal gathering in Europe. How is that even possible?" Alex didn't answer because at that moment Genevieve began descending the grand staircase that curved down from the balcony like something carved for a queen. Each step she took carried a calm authority that parted the crowd instinctively, guests shifting aside as though guided by an invisible current. The emerald velvet of her gown flowed across the marble steps behind her like dark water, and with every movement the chandelier light caught the diamonds at her throat, scattering fragments of white fire across the walls. Alex noticed something else too. She wasn't alone. A tall man followed several steps behind her, broad-shouldered and silent, wearing a black suit cut sharply enough to suggest military discipline. A faint scar crossed his left eyebrow, and the way he scanned the room told Alex immediately that this man was not decoration. He was protection. And the fact that Genevieve now required protection meant her power was not symbolic, it was real. As she reached the ballroom floor, one of the most influential men in the room stepped forward to greet her. Senator Julian Blackwood from the United States, a man Alex had spent 2 years attempting to meet through intermediaries, bowed his head respectfully before kissing her gloved hand. The gesture sent a ripple of whispers through the crowd. Alex felt the air leave his lungs. When politicians bowed to criminals, it meant the criminal owned the table. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Sterling," a dry voice murmured beside him. Alex turned to find Lord Evelyn Carlisle standing there with a crystal martini glass balanced between his fingers. Carlisle was old money in its purest form, a financier whose influence reached deep into European banking circles and shadow markets alike. Alex had pursued meetings with him for years without success. Now, the man regarded him with mild amusement. "Lord Carlyle," Alex managed stiffly. "You seem familiar with her." Carlyle chuckled softly, glancing toward Genevieve as she spoke quietly with a cluster of powerful guests. "Familiar? My dear boy, the entire continent has been talking about her for months." Alex felt his pulse quicken. Talking about what? Carlyle took a slow sip of his martini before answering, clearly enjoying the tension tightening across Alex's face. The Van Dorn dynasty never disappeared, Sterling. It merely hid itself. 2 centuries of wealth, shipping empires, and private security networks quietly accumulating influence across Europe. When the old Duchess died 2 years ago, her only surviving heir inherited everything. Alex's throat tightened, and that heir was Genevieve. Carlyle smiled faintly. "Apparently so. Quite the surprise, wouldn't you say?" Alex stared across the ballroom again as Genevieve moved gracefully among the guests, greeting them like a sovereign greeting visiting dignitaries. But what unsettled him most wasn't the title or the wealth Carlyle had described. It was the expression on her face. She looked calm, completely at ease, as if she had always belonged here, as if the quiet woman he once dismissed had simply been waiting for the right moment to reveal her true identity. Tiffany tugged on his sleeve again, whispering excitedly, "Ollie, we should go talk to her. I mean, she's your ex-wife. This could actually be good for us." Alex didn't respond immediately, because something far more disturbing had just occurred to him. 2 years ago, that was when the Duchess died, just months after his divorce from Genevieve had been finalized. And suddenly, Alex understood the horrifying possibility that had been hiding in plain sight all evening. If Genevieve inherited the Van Dorn empire 2 years ago, then the mysterious investors who funded the expansion of his own criminal operations last year might not have been strangers at all. They might have been her. The realization struck Alessandro Sterling like cold water running down his spine, sharp and unwelcome. Across the ballroom, Genevieve continued moving through the crowd with effortless grace, accepting greetings from crime bosses, financiers, and politicians as if she had known them her entire life. The emerald velvet of her gown shimmered beneath the chandeliers, and wherever she stepped, conversations softened into respectful murmurs. Alex had spent decades clawing his way into rooms like this, fighting for recognition among men who controlled empires older than the city itself. Yet Genevieve walked among them as though she had been born into the throne they offered her. The thought ignited a bitter knot in his chest. Tiffany noticed the tension in his expression and leaned closer, her voice dropping to a curious whisper. "Ollie, you're acting like she's dangerous," she said. "She's just your ex-wife." Alex gave a quiet, humorless laugh. "No," he murmured under his breath. "She's something else now." Before Tiffany could ask what he meant, the shifting of the crowd created a sudden opening through the center of the ballroom. Conversations faltered as heads turned in unison. Genevieve had finished speaking with the senator and now moved slowly through the parting guests, her gaze calm and focused as though she had already chosen a destination. Alex felt a strange tightening in his chest as he realized exactly where she was walking. Toward him. The room seemed to hold its breath as she approached. Even the orchestra in the corner softened their playing, the music fading into a distant whisper of strings. The tall man with the scarred eyebrow followed closely behind her, his sharp eyes scanning the room with disciplined precision. Alex straightened instinctively, the old instinct of dominance rising in his posture even as uncertainty crept beneath it. When Genevieve finally stopped a few feet away, the difference between the past and the present stood painfully clear. Up close, she looked even more striking, the confidence in her expression replacing every trace of the shy woman he remembered. Her eyes settled calmly on Alex, as if she had expected this meeting all along. "Alessandro," she said quietly, her voice smooth and composed. The sound of his name in her mouth sent an unexpected chill through him. "Genevieve," he replied, forcing his voice to remain steady. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them stretched long enough for nearby guests to notice the tension. Tiffany shifted uncomfortably at Alex's side, clearly sensing she had stepped into a conversation she did not fully understand. Genevieve's gaze flicked briefly toward her. "And this must be Tiffany," she said politely. Her tone carried no anger, no jealousy, only a distant curiosity that made Tiffany straighten proudly rather than shrink away. "Yes," Tiffany said quickly. "It's nice to finally meet you." Genevieve gave a small nod before returning her attention to Alex. "You look well," she said calmly. Alex folded his arms across his chest, refusing to let her composure unsettle him. "I could say the same," he replied, "though I admit I'm curious how my ex-wife became the most powerful woman in this room." Genevieve's lips curved faintly, though the smile did not quite reach her eyes. "Life has a way of surprising us," she said. Alex leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice. "Let's skip the polite conversation. I heard about the Van Dorn inheritance. Impressive timing, just months after our divorce." Genevieve did not react to the implication.
If you enjoyed this story and want to watch the full version, you can continue it on my Patreon. On Patreon, you will find the complete story and many more exclusive stories, including alpha, mafia, and romance dramas. If you love deep emotional stories, powerful characters, and dramatic relationships, Patreon is where I share the full experience. Visit my Patreon to unlock the full story and support the channel. The Patreon link is available in the video description below.